Gods of War, 1. A Girdlestone Tale. Chapter 1 The White Knights. Nathan's father was a man who was leader of the White Knights. He was born a White Knight, and after his father's death he later found that his destiny was to fight the war and lead the White Knights through Earth, Heaven and Hell to victory. That's what his fortune was. David was a man who was taught the arts of black magic by his elder Grim. Grim was the leader of the monastery and he had many followers and would later help the Highlanders. Stuart's brother taught him how to fight with a sword, but his brother died of fever and he joined the White Knights as a teenager when his true love was kidnapped during the night by Death, who then took her to hell. He vowed that he would fight until he found her once more. Stephen was a good friend of Stuart and Death went to kidnap him but Stuart managed to save him, so Stephen vowed to fight alongside Stuart until he found Dany once again. Scott, when he was young, his mother came into his room and told him to hide the Cupid till the sun rose and shined into the Cupid, but he heard screaming and saw his mother and father killed, and his father had put a spear in the Cupid. He picked it up and charged and killed a demon who had killed his mother and father. His father was a White Knight, so Scott found Nathan's father and Nathan taught Scott what Scott's father didn't teach him. Chapter 2 The Beginning. Lee was a man who had no family. They were all killed many years ago. He was brought up by an old man who was trained by the samurai and taught him how to use a sword. The day was like any other day. He would woke up, he would go and train with his sword, then he would come back, but today did seem a little bit odd. He felt as if he was being followed. He came to a back lane which he hated walking through at night because it was always gloomy, and tonight there was a thick mist lingering in the air, but he decided to walk through it anyway because he just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. When Lee was halfway through he heard whispering, so he stopped and looked around but couldn't see a thing. He dropped his bag and stood still. He could feel the cold all around him and the air was so deathly thick he could barely breathe. Then he heard, "Finally we have found you." He looked around and heard an aggressive shout, then a bag came over his face and he felt a thud on his head and he blacked out. Once he was knocked out he fell into a state of dream. He was on the floor holding a woman in his arms. She had been poisoned, he was not sure why, but in the dream it all made sense. He knew what was going on. Suddenly he felt water hit him and the words "wake up." Lee was tied up in a dark room which had a single candle burning. All he could think about was the dream and what it meant and how it didn't make sense anymore. Then he saw this man with long hair looking at him, so he asked him, "Why am I here?" He replied, "Because of your past. The fact is, we need you." Lee couldn't believe it. What would they need him for? He wondered. All I'm really good at is practicing with a samurai sword, nothing more, he thought to himself. Then the man said, "Forgive me, for I have not introduced myself. I am Stuart, and the reason we need you is because there is a war against mankind approaching. It draws closer each day. We will need all the people who are strong and will fight for what they believe in to stand by us against evil." Lee was sitting there amazed at what he was saying, thinking, who are we fighting against? He continued to say, "We are looking for a certain woman. I heard you have dreamed of her and you will be able to tell us what she looks like." And then the dream he had before came into his head once more and he heard himself say, "Yes, I have dreamed of a woman, but how can we be certain that it's the women you speak of?" Stuart replied, "Because nobody else would dream of a woman dying in his arms like you have." Lee was speechless. How could he possibly know? Stuart then stepped across the room and sat down wearing his dark cloak. He put his hood over his head and looked as if he was in deep in thought. He wasn't the only one. Shortly another man entered the room, also cloaked, and said, "Tell me, Lee. Would you ever kill a man?" Lee responded by telling him it would all depend on whether I absolutely had to. He then asked, "Would you kill him if he betrayed you and tried to kill the one you loved but you had the chance to let him go?" His answer to that was, "Well, I wouldn't think he deserved to live, so yes, I would kill him." The man then walked towards Lee and kneeled down, grabbed his hand and solemnly but with desperation in his voice asked, "Will you help us? We need to defend our homes from what is coming." To this very day Lee didn't know what made him do it, but he rose to his feet and said, "Yes, I will help you." The man on his knees then introduced himself. He was called Ste. Chapter 3. Told the Truth. Later that night they untied Lee and took him through a dark hallway. Lee felt as if he was in a castle by the looks of the walls. They then put him in a room with a few other people, so he looked around while everyone in the room gazed at him. One of them said, I guess they needed you too. Ye nodded and some of the men and women came towards him and introduced themselves. One of the women was called Elise. Ye thought she was quite pretty, her eyes seemed to always try and gaze into his and her long hair was so beautiful and wild. She asked Lee, what do you think this is all about? Ye replied by saying I'm not sure but I hope it's a nightmare. She told Lee how she was skilled with a sword because her father taught her. He never told her where his knowledge came from, but she recently found out he fought for some secret army called the White Knights. Unfortunately he was killed. She looked really upset about it. Ye never knew what it felt to have parents, at least, Ye couldn't remember how it felt to lose them, so he just put his arms around her hoping it would help make her feel better. Just then, the other two people who started talking to Elise and Ye said they were called Ste and David. Ste was skilled because he self-taught himself with a blade for many years. He was from Italy but he spoke English very well, and David was a man who knew everything about witchcraft and he was quite skilled at healing people. He was from France. He grew up in some village to the east of France. He didn't talk about it too much though. Chapter 4: A moving speech. The next morning Stuart came in and woke them all up to tell them we were all going to see something important which will make you all understand what we were all brought here for. So they all followed him out and down a long flight of stairs to the bottom floor until they were very deep underground. They came to a dark tunnel and Stuart said we have to pass through, so we began to walk forward. Ye had a very cold feeling and he stood beside Elise. She grabbed hold of his hand as they walked for about 3 minutes and eventually began to see a light at the end of the tunnel. It was burning so bright that it made Lee's eyes hurt. He hadn't seen such bright light all day. After some time they came to a large circular room. When Ye looked up he could see a light blue, stained glass ceiling which gave off a rippling blue water effect. Stuart, Ste and 5 others came into the room, all dressed in black cloaks. One of them who Ye hadn't been introduced to, who had long black hair and looked Italian, started to talk and said, you must not be afraid, just hear what I have to say and you may leave if you wish. Stuart here will lead you out. Then he said, today is the 4th February 1860, in about 2 months' time we will be fighting a war against another dimension or world, whatever you wish to call it, called Venom, and the warriors of that other dimension cannot be killed by guns. Therefore the army's technology is useless against these things. The only weapon that will kill them is a sword or spear or arrows, and you people who are here today are the best. Altogether there are 8,000 of you and we would like you to join a cause which has lasted over hundreds of years, which was created by Nostradamus. He then pulled out a long roll of parchment that looked like it was hundreds of years old. It was written in Latin but the Italian man translated it for us. It read, I have correctly predicted many things, but this is my worst prediction yet. Coming from the east, an army of demons led by Death himself, coming from south Satan and all the evil he holds in hell, and coming from the north, not God, but my white knights who stand in the way of evil and do anything and everything to save the earth from total domination of evil and loss of all human life. Ye stood amazed, thinking it seemed too real. After all, everything else he predicted came true. What's to say this prediction would be any different, however impossible it seemed? Nathan continued by reading the last part, which scared Lee more than anything else which had been muttered that day. There is a woman who will need to be ultimately protected from the evil forces, otherwise, if evil takes claim on her, the world will end and the kingdom of heaven will belong to Satan himself. After he read the script he broke the tense silence which followed, by putting forward his request. So, warriors of our earth, are you to go home and wait for this terrible fate to come to you, your friends, your families, and be alone in defending them all, or will you join the White Knights and be part of a united front, with all of us behind each of you, and live on against all evil? We all screamed out something along the lines of yes. We will fight. Chapter 5. A White Knight's Guide on How to Fight. Later that day Nathan came to Lee and said, you are one of the best swordsmen here, so I'm giving you a chance to learn the way we White Knights use the sword. and Lee accepted his offer and he took him into another room which looked really clean for where we were, and Nathan started doing some moves with his sword which made Lee very impressed. Then he started to talk to Lee. He said the only way to kill a demon is by the sword, so you have to know your sword and love your sword, and when your enemy comes towards you, show him that your relationship with your sword is stronger than his and put your sword through the evil demon, and then you will see that he was too late to realize how close you and your sword were. Ie was quite moved by what he was saying, so Nathan walked towards him and said, I have a gift from your friend, the old samurai. He told me to give you his best friend and hopes it will become yours. Nathan then clapped his hands together and Stephen came in with a gift for Lee. He then put it in his hand and he took the overlaying robe off what the item was, and it turned out to be the red dragon sword. Its handle was of a red and black color, stripes like a tiger, and the blade itself went straight then into a curve just like a samurai sword. I was much surprised to have this sword, but Ie felt a sudden love for the sword. Nathan asked Lee to show him what the old man taught him, so Ie done a few twists and turns with his sword. They all seem impressed, but all of a sudden Ie stopped still and looked at Stuart and Nathan and said, wait a minute, what happened to the old man? Is he ok? Stuart said, we tried to get to your home before the spy demons got there, but we were too late. They took him. They obviously thought he was Lee, and Ie was then deep in thought, hoping he was ok. 3 weeks went by of training. Then Nathan came to Lee and told him he'd like to see him and Stuart in 10 minutes, so they went to see him in 10 minutes and he said, Lee, we have a mission for you to do and Stuart will help you. Your mission is to go find the woman, but not now, tomorrow morning, because I know you don't know now, but you will by tomorrow. Dismissed. So Ie then went back to the room where Elise and Ste were, and Ie began to eat the bowl of soup Elise gave him, and she started to talk about how bored she was getting of waiting around for something that may not happen. Then Lee finished his soup and looked around at the room, which only had a candle burning. It was quite dark. Ie could only see the dark wardrobe at the top of the room, so he decided to lay flat and look at the ceiling, and Ie fell deep into thought about the woman. Then Elise came and lay beside him, and Ie just turned to his side, so Ie was facing her, and she said, I'm sick of being here and feeling alone, sleeping in a bed where I feel cold because I have no one to hold me. So Ie just put his arms round her and she moved in close, so he began to run my fingers through her hair and he looked into her eyes, and Ie moved in to kiss her and she moved in to kiss Lee. They kissed for a while. She then took off her clothes and she had a beautiful body and then sat on top of him, then began to undress him. Then Ie heard a really loud smash on the ground and Ie woke up with his clothes on and his arms around Elise. She was asleep and Ie was thinking, did I make love with Elise or was I dreaming? He wasn't going to wake her up and ask her, so Ie looked around and there was nothing, so he climbed back into bed and went to sleep. Ie began to dream of being in a large city and there was a road which led out of it and took you to a small cottage, and there was a woman sitting outside on a rock beside a lake, and it looked like the woman who Ie was dying in his arms. When Ie went up next to her, she turned and looked at him, then disappeared, and a horrible cloaked figure really tall began to walk towards him. He was holding a large axe and Ie fell to the floor. He put his foot on me to hold him down and said, now your woman is mine and so are you. Ie woke up with a scream and Elise was there awake to saying, Lee, calm down, it was only a nightmare. So Ie lay back down trying to relax. The candle had burned out and it looked like it was coming close to 09:30 am, and Ie was just lying there and the door opened and it was Nathan and Stuart, and Nathan said, did you find her? Ie said, yes, I believe she is on the outskirts of London. Nathan then looked at Lee and said, well, it's to London, you must go get dressed. Death will have kidnappers after her, so be careful. Death will most probably send his best demon to do it. He is called Slave, who commands around 30 demons who will be looking for her as well as you do, so be ready by 10:00. Chapter 6 Search for the Women. When Ie was ready, Stuart took him outside of the castle. It looked like it had been raining for a month outside. Lee and Stuart continues to walk towards the road and we came to a stable. He said, this is my stable, pick whichever horse you wish. We are quite far from London, so we had better get a move on to find this cottage of yours. So we began our journey to London. Ie didn't know where he was or anything until they got onto the main roadway and looked at their map of the country, and they were at York, so they had a good day's worth of travelling to do, so it was quiet on the road for a while. Stuart then said, are you as good as Nathan with a sword? Ie didn't know what to say, so he said, I don't know, I was trained by an old samurai who was very amazing at what he could do with a sword. Stuart just then said, oh ok, then well, Nathan only knows how to fight like a white knight. You know both white knight and samurai, so you are properly better than Nathan. All Ie could really say was yay after that, because Stuart was right. Stuart then told Lee to get some rest because he may need Soye then closed his eyes and fell into a sleep. Ye was having a dream about running up many flights of stairs and he didn't know what was chasing him or where he was going. Ye was just following a man cloaked in black and the woman Ye had been dreaming about was behind him and then everything around him changed. Ye was no longer inside a building running up many flights of stairs. He was now in a great hall with Stuart and Nathan and it was empty but the walls all around them were being hit with something and the fear was taking over Lee, but he knew he had to be strong, so he looked to the left side of his waist and there was his dragon sword, so he pulled it out and then the door at the other side of the hall flew open and Ye never saw what was coming. It was all so fast but Ye woke up in an instant and Stuart had his hand on Lee's shoulder and told him we had arrived at a cottage outside of London. Ye then got off his horse and looked around the cottage. Ye then decided to go round the back to see if the lake was there and the rock like in his dream. Ye then noticed there was a lake with a rock and it looked like someone had been sitting there, so Ye walked over to investigate some more and he noticed that there was a woman lying unconscious on the floor. Ye picked her up and it looked like the woman in his dream. Then Ye heard Stuart scream, "Lee, behind you," and Stuart was racing towards Lee with his sword drawn and Ye dropped the woman and looked behind him to see these two creatures running towards him. One of them had an orange face with black dots over his face and his eyes glowed red. He was wearing armor that humans wore in medieval times. It was Slaith and his companion Istar was just about the same, just he was blue with black dots on his face. He then stood in front of the women and drew his sword and Stuart got to Lee and stood by him and said, "Well, let's see if you can beat these demons." Slaith looked at Lee and Stuart and smirked and said, "Humph, you really think you can beat me?" And in the background Istar began to laugh in the background. THW then ran towards them. Stuart then turned his back to the demons, then done a full swing off his sword and clashed with Slaith's sword. Stuart was then blocking with confidence but Slaith was beginning to get tired of fighting for a while. Meanwhile Lee was fighting Istar and cut the demon almost in half. The demon lay there and died. As for the other demon, he ran between his legs and tripped Lee up and cut some of the women's hair and ran off towards his other 30 demons. Stuart grabbed Lee's arm and shouted, "Come into the cottage, we will hold them off in there as long as we can. Show me what you can do." Lee picked up the women and ran into the cottage and lay her on the floor while Stuart began to block up the windows with parts of furniture. Lee then helped Stuart barrack the door. The demons surrounded the house. Slaith began to shout, "So you killed my best friend Istar, but it will be me and my men who finish you." For him, Stuart and Lee had then drawn their swords and Stuart shouted, "Well, come on then, Slaith, give us everything you got." Heist. Then the door smashed open but they didn't break through the barricade just yet. Stuart noticed a kettle on the stove with boiling hot water. Whle Lee cut down those who tried getting in. Stuart filled a bucket with scalding water and ran towards the entrance where the demons were trying to smash through. He shouted, "Lee, move." He then threw scalding hot water over a couple of demons who fell to the floor in agony and to finish them off with a finishing stab by his blade. Just then Stuart saw that Slaith had ran through the portal with around 15 of his best demons but left his remaining dozen who approached the entrance. They made their way into the cottage. Lee and Stu were in the main room, stood back to back with around 10 demons surrounding them. Lee said, "Well, this is what I call a last stand." Stuart began to last as he threw his sword into the flesh of one of the demons who fell dead onto the floor. As he ran shywards his sword, he struck another with his fist while Lee followed up and cut off one of his limbs. As Stu got his sword back and stuck it into the flesh of the demon, Stuart and Lee were cutting down these demons with ease until there was only 2 left. 2 demons charged in at either end. As Lee and Stuart were in the middle, they turned and looked at each other. They then duck-dodged the swing of the demon swing. Swept their feet, they fell on the floor and Stuart and Lee finished them off. Stuart said, "Well, he's gone but at least the woman is still alive. Brings warm feelings to my heart." They then carried the women into the carriage and took her back to the castle so Nathan could see her. Chapter 7. The storm has begun. Later that day the women was asleep in the carriage and Ye was looking out into the distance and noticed dark clouds, really dark, so dark it looked like night, and you could see flashes of lightning inside them. And Stuart said, "Looks like there is a storm coming, we better get a move on before it hits us." So he made his horses run faster, faster, he shouted, and they eventually arrived at Holy Island Castle. And the rain was really thick and the lightning was constantly flashing while they were outside, so they had to run inside of the building. Once Lee and Stuart got inside, they came to Nathan's room. He then put her on his bed and left her there to rest. He then came to Lee and said, "The changes are beginning, the storms are happening, death will be here soon, and after the storm clears we head for Dover." Ye was thinking why we need to head for Dover. Then he realized maybe there is more white knights that could fight for us there, but he may be wrong. The next morning the woman was sitting at the bottom of Lee's bed and she was looking at him, and when she noticed he was awake she smiled. She had a pure smile of beauty with beautiful dark brown eyes and light skin with long black hair which looked so immensely soft, and she spoke with soft words saying, "I'd like to thank you for what you did. I recognized your face from a while back. I've saw you in my dreams. You're always protecting me from certain things, and the other day when you saved me I thought it was just a dream once more, then I wake up to find it's a reality and am thankful for what you did." Ye then asked her what her name was and she said, "My name is Monglisha." 1 week and 3 days went by and the storm finally stopped, and a man came with a letter, and on the letter it said, "America, Russia, Southern Europe and Africa are taken over by some army of darkness and they are heading towards England, coming closer every day." At that moment Nathan screamed out, "Hurry everyone, suit up, the time has come when you will prove yourself as a white knight." So they all set out for Dover, not knowing what will be there to meet them apart from evil and hatred. It took the White Knights 2 days and 9 hours to reach Dover, and when they got to Dover Castle they knew they had to quickly mount defences for the oncoming army that would be really strong, maybe 100,000 demons able to fight for Death himself, and there was only 5,000 White Knights. After Nathan had gathered all his strength, the White Knights were really outnumbered, but no matter what, the fight would come to them at the end anyway, and they have to delay the advance of the demons. Chapter 8 Battle of Dover Castle. The night had come across the land and the land become gloomy and rain began to pour from the heavens, and towards the sea there was a very thick mist crossing the water so you couldn't see very far, and with a crash of thunder here and a flash of lightning there, some of the White Knights had a feeling of fear and doubt inside of them, and Ye couldn't sense this, so Lee was quite sure Nathan could, but there was nothing really he could do about it. War was upon England, the last free country of earth. 5 hours went by of standing around. The time was now 11:30 at night and there seemed to be nothing around, hardly a sound apart from the rain and the thunder. Then all of a sudden one of the White Knights shouted, "What is that coming from the sea?" So they all headed towards the castle wall which was nearest to the sea and saw a light coming towards them. The mist disguised its identity so they didn't know what it was. Then Nathan suddenly screamed, "Fireball, duck!" So they all jumped to the floor holding their heads, and a large fireball hit the castle, and then more and more fireballs seemed to be crashing off the castle wall. This made some of the White Knights were unable to move with fear. A constant rain of fireballs kept hitting the castle. This went on for 6 hours until they could all see the sun rise, and Stephen looked over the wall and said, "Three, so many of them, everyone weapons ready. We are being attacked and English men are dying, so defend your country, your world. If you fall, so does your world." Then there was loud shouts from the White Knights. They were all ready to fight against the demons. Nathan decided the best way of defense was to take a stand on the rooftop of the castle because the doorway to the roof would have put the demons into a bottleneck, so they all had a defensive stance to fight against the demons. They had blocked the doorway and braced the gate to the roof to delay their entry onto the roof to fight. Nathan then came to Lee and told him to defend Monglisha because if she gets captured there's no point in being here, so they were all standing by ready to fight, and Ye had to be at the back of the White Knights with Monglisha, and she said, "I hope we can somehow find a way to end this because I don't want to fall in the hands of evil, but I'm glad to have you protecting me." When she said those words she held on to Lee's hand and looked in his eyes and smiled with a sudden happiness. But then Slaith jumped up and went to grab Monglisha and kidnap her, but Stuart was quick to react and he cut Slaith's hand off, and Ye drew his dragon sword and stuck it through his chest, and he fell down Dover Castle and hit the water dead. Chapter 9 The Loss and Retreat of Dover Castle. The door began to shake and get continually hit bit some kind of weapon. This continues for 10 minutes. They eventually broke through the door and the evil demons noticed there was a lot of White Knights here to fight and they had them in a bottleneck. Nathan then called a charge and we all charged in. Ye remember seeing Stuart slicing one of the demons' throats and then quickly switching to cut another in half because he was that strong and feared no one, but some of the White Knights were being cut down because of fear and tiredness, and rows after rows of demons kept rolling back. Nathan became surrounded by demons and took away from the White Knights, and he was wounded in his left knee, but Stephen and Stuart came to his aid and killed many demons trying to get to his rescue. Elise was twisting and turning with a sword slaying demons with ease, but she was becoming tired. All of the White Knights were because of a long journey and having to prepare defenses and an escape route. As time went on the White Knights started to lose men dramatically, so Nathan called the fall back off the castle top so the White Knights knights would jump off the castle top into the lake at the bottom of the castle to escape in 20s at a time, and the rest would stay and defend. Stuart jumped with the first lot of white knights, and his black cloak was torn by a demon who almost cut him. Eventually, when there was 1,000 white knights on the other side of the lake, Nathan ordered Lee and Mongisha to make a jump for it. Just then all the demons froze and looked to the doorway from where they had got to the roof, and Death himself come through, and he stared straight at Lee and Mongisha, and time seemed to freeze for what seemed forever. He had a cold fear inside him because Death only took life, and he had a feeling he was coming for his. All of a sudden Stephen grabbed Lee's arm and said, "If you don't get her out of here before he gets here, it will be too late now. Jump." So he threw Mongisha over the top and he followed her, and with another 18 white knights they swam to the shore. Nathan gave Stuart orders to make way for Holy Island Castle as soon as Mongisha arrived at the shore, so they all jumped on their horses and made way from Dover to London to see if we could pick up any survivors. But when they arrived, London was nothing but ash off constant flames, and it was almost the same for every other city they went to. But they picked up 17 survivors and they were pretty badly injured. They then come to a church and they needed to go to it to see if there was any survivors, but when they arrived there was no one, so the White Knights decided to set camp for the night and set out early the next morning for Holy Island Castle. But their luck got thinner because the horses had all died because of exhaustion, so they had to make the rest of the journey on foot. Chapter 10 Love and Hate Collide. Stuart made them all some food and come over to Lee with his food and Mongisha's and said, "We have 1,000 white knights here, but yet I do not feel safe. Do you feel the same?" And Ye was thinking that the dark armies might move really fast, but then Ye replied, "Yes, I don't feel safe, but I know the armies of death are very far away and we have enough time to rest and relax until tomorrow morning, and we should leave at sunrise." While Ye was eating his food, Mongisha was sitting near him but sitting quietly. Ye then said, "Is there something wrong with you?" And she replied by saying, "I don't know if you white knights will be able to defend me anymore after the next week, because I don't think there will be many of you left, but I know you'll still be alive, Lee, because you have to be, otherwise the white knights will fall easily." She then got up, turned round, so she had her back to Lee, and then walked away and began to talk to Stuart. Later that night while Ye was asleep, she come to him and said, "I'm sorry to wake you, but I have to stay with you because it hurts me inside not being able to see your face." So Ye looked at her face and she was looking back. Ye put his arms around her and ran his fingers through her hair, then rubbed his fingers up and down her lips and held her near, and Ye kissed her a few times. She then joined him on his bed. As Ye slept, he had a dream about the war being over and me walking side by side with Mongisha and everything working out, and there was no more war. Then Ye slowly began to fall out of the dream and back into reality, and he noticed a dark-shaped figure about to put a knife into Mongisha, so Ye went to apprehend them, but the attempted assassin ran off outside into the graveyard and fell over. Ye took the helmet off and realized it was Elise. She was in tears and said, "I thought you loved me," and Ye said, "What are you talking about? I never said I did love you." And then she just hung her head in shame. Ye then said, "You better run, because if any of them finds out you tried to kill Mongisha, you're as good as dead." And then a dark shadow came behind Elise and grabbed her by the throat and said, "So you're the traitor we have been looking for. It took me a while to realize who it was, but it was you, Elise." Stuart and Nathan had been watching Elise and waited for a time to strike. Stuart said, "For what you did, you are no longer a white knight. You may go wherever you like, but not where we head, because otherwise any white knights who are here or at Dover or Holy Island or on their way to Holy Island have permission to kill you there and then, so run now, run." Elise then began to run and she disappeared into the cemetery, and Stuart said she wanted to kill Mongisha out of bitter jealousy. "Love makes you do insane things, I guess." Ye then returned to his bed where Mongisha lay looking so calm and beautiful, and Ye wished he could dream the same. Chapter 11 Over the Hills into Shadow. Ye couldn't sleep that night. Instead he went outside to await the sunrise to wake all the white knights and get them ready for the last part of their journey to Holy Island Castle. But as he looked over to the sky, he heard sounds such as a train moving sound coming from the other side of the hill to the south of the castle, so he ran towards the hill to see what was coming, and as he looked over the oncoming land he saw a large legion of demons heading towards them. Ye thought that they must have been on the move all night, so he ran back screaming, "Everyone wake up, the demons are here, wake up, we must leave now." Stuart come running out of the doors and saw the armies also coming, and he then orders all the white knights to wake and prepare to leave, and leave all items you can, we must travel light. As we left the castle, Ye thought about Elise and what she will be doing now and whether she would survive. Then he looked at his side and saw Mongisha, and she smiled as Ye gazed upon her. He then looked to his other side and saw a young man with long curly hair, and Ye said, How can I help you, young knight? The young white knight replied, I am Jonathan and I am honored to fight alongside you, Lee, but I must warn you we are coming up to something which you might have heard of called Stonehenge, and I believe we will be ambushed there. He then said, well, if that's the case I'm sure we will come out of it somehow, and Jonathan looked at Lee as if he had something to add, but then he mumbled, even if death himself is there, and then he walked off to talk to Stuart. He then turned to Montgisha and said, when we get to Stonehenge stick close to me, I have a bad feeling about what's going to happen there. As they were walking along a country path they came in view of Stonehenge, but its beauty was destroyed by the dark gloomy weather and the snow, and none of the white knights were in the mood for sightseeing, but they had to walk, though Stonehenge is a short cut to the north. But as they got closer they noticed that there were also other rocks around that hadn't been there before, and they come to this forest wood which was a mile out from Stonehenge, and he then saw Jonathan and went to speak with him and said, I think you were right, I believe we are walking into an ambush. You can hear the evil whispers in the wood. Jonathan nodded and said, if we get ambushed, get Montgisha and head in a northeast direction. You will come to a hill which is as big as a mountain and it has a wood going all around it. It's the safest way though, because the wood covers you all the way to York and there's a keep there, and I believe Montgisha is better off there rather than Holy Island, because there is still civilians in York and we could get as many people as we possibly could to yield a sword. Jonathan made sense, but they wouldn't have had time, because by now if Death himself sent half his army north and the other half straight for Stuart and his men, the other half would be at York now. And EA told him what EA thought, and EA saw defeat in his eyes, but he did not expect to see victory. EA then said, we have to get to Holy Island as quickly as possible. A man who looked really small but looked strong came over and spoke to Jonathan. He then saw Lee and bowed and said, Lee, I am Scott and I believe our best option is to go through the woods in the Midlands across half of the country and head for York, otherwise we have no chance. He then said, our forces have been split and Death would have chased Nathan to Holy Island, so he will be at York already and it will be gone, so there is no point in putting hope there. All we can do is be strong and head for Holy Island and kill as many demons as possible. Chapter 12 Battle of Stonehenge. As the White Knights came in sight of Stonehenge again they saw a stream quite large, but it was frozen over and it had begun to snow, and as they got to the stream and looked to the top of the hill they saw Stonehenge and they were going to stop there to eat, so they all got to the top of the hill and EA turned around and looked at the lake and thought that they should lay a trap there in case the demons come, so EA gathered a couple of White Knights, Jonathan, Stuart, David and Scott and a few others, and they battered the ice so it would break easily after a certain amount of weight got on it. They left the lake as it stood and went to eat, and as they ate they spoke about what they could do if the war come to an end and the White Knights all lived happily again and all evil was gone. And then Scott stood up and spoke about his life and how a demon had slain his parents because his father was a White Knight, so that's why he chose to be one, and he prayed that his fate would not have been the same. And then Jonathan arose speaking of how his love was a young knight and she died at Dover. He tried everything to save her and now he was going to kill as many demons as he could. And then Stuart arose and spoke of a woman who was a little bit shorter than him and she had long dark hair, and to him there was no one more perfect, and she was stolen from him in the night by some evil demon named Slaith, who took her on a death carriage all in black, and word got to him that she was taken to hell, and now he wanted to find his way back to her, but he didn't know how. And then all of a sudden we heard loud screeching and screams from where the river was, and as the White Knights looked towards it, and there was the demon army and they were standing by the river but not on it, so they had to get them to fall into their trap. So they got a few White Knights who were brave enough to go as close to the river as possible without them charging straight away, and about 15 White Knights went down and stood in a line facing the demons, taunting them. The demons all charged towards the White Knights. A couple ran straight across the ice and Scott and Jonathan charged and began to fight off the demons. Jonathan had thrown one of them over his shoulder and quickly turned to another and slain the demons by sticking his blade in his chest, and as the other demon arose Scott stabbed it in the back and it fell to the floor and died slowly. The demons then fell back, and as they came onto the lake there was about 300 of the demons and the lake collapsed in and they all fell in the ice-cold water and drowned and froze to their death, and the other demons were stunned. Then their general gave the orders for them to swim through and get to the knights, so the 15 White Knights went back to the top of the hill, and as they were running back all the White Knights got as many boulders and rock as they could ready roll them down the hill. As the White Knights ran past the other White Knights at the top of the hill and the men got on the hill they were going pretty slow with being soaking wet, and as they got halfway up Stuart gave the order to roll the boulders down the hill, and we did so, and the demons were stunned and they were too wet and heavy to dive out the way, and the boulders rolled over them because they ran in single file up hills to hide their numbers, and the boulder rolled into the river. The White Knights killed over 200 demons with the boulders. They then stood in lines of 200 and made a shield wall with the following White Knights behind with spears and the following with swords, and the demons finally got across the river, and their numbers were quite small, so the White Knights believed they stood a chance, and they changed their attack formation to a line attack instead of single line. They then charged up the hill, and their first wave clashed with a shield wall and fell back down the hill, and their second wave come up and the shield line lay on the floor, and the other White Knights who had spears threw spears at the demons, and some went through the throats of the demons and some into the stomach. Black blood then splattered everywhere and guts lay on the floor while demons lay there screaming in pain till they died. Stuart ordered the White Knights to draw swords and charge at the remaining demons, and with a loud scream the White Knights charged and collided with the demons, and Lee stood by Montgisha because he was her protector, and a few demons broke out and came towards Lee and Montgisha, and Lee drew his sword and they surrounded him, and they kept jumping at Lee and jumping back to make him flinch, but one demon jumped too far forwards and Lee sliced his throat, and they all ran at him at once, and all of a sudden a dark cloaked figure came up behind Lee and stood by his side and said need a hand. He was a White Knight. He spoke in an American accent and he had 15 people with him, and they ran at the demons, and one of the White Knights was unlucky to be killed by the demon. He was struck with the spear the demon had, but it left him open for Lee to cut his arm off then slice his throat to give him a very slow and painful death. The cloaked man then told the other White Knights to go join the battle while he spoke to Lee. He then took his mask off and he had long black hair, and he said John, I'm from America. We came here 2 days ago ahead of the demons looking for the White Knights of England. My father was a White Knight and he descended over to USA to train White Knights over there to defend America, but there wasn't enough. I brought all who were left of the White Knights in America. Now all the people are slaves and are awaiting to get the branding of 666 on their arm, and a legend of a king who calls himself Zordid is being whispered around the White Knights. Ea was quite stunned to find that they demons were sparing humans as slaves, but Ea thought him not going to be defeated and be turned into a slave for death. John then said I have to warn you, the demons you are fighting over there are a decoy. The rest of them are going around to ambush you here, so you had better hurry up and retreat. Meanwhile in the battle on the hill, in the middle of the battle, Stuart came one-on-one with the demon general. The demon general swung his sword and Stuart ducked and went to slice the general's leg, but the general blocked it with his other sword and cut Stuart's arm, but it wasn't a deep cut. Stuart then kicked the evil general in the groin and punched him in the face and went to slice his throat, but the general blocked once more and threw Stu over his shoulder. Stuart arose with haste and said to the general, you are a cheat, you have to fight with 2 swords to win, and the general said, well, I don't have a sprit, but you do, you have 2 people fighting for you. And then the general struck Stuart to the floor once more with his foot and put his foot on Stuart's chest and said, I have 2 swords, one for your body and one for your soul, and Stuart then said, this is not the moment of my death, and pulled a dagger out of his armor and stabbed the general in the foot, and the general fell back. Stuart threw the dagger into the chest of the demon general and he fell to his knees, and Stuart cut his arms off, picked up the one of the demon's swords, so he was now holding his own and the demon's, and sliced his head off with his sword, and Stuart said you can only hold one of us down with 1 foot. Chapter 13. A Last Stand. As the demons lay there dead altogether, there was 800 demons dead and only 850 White Knights survived the battle, and Stuart and John spoke, and John told them about the diversion and how there's a larger army of demons heading this way, and Stuart said we are all too tired to move, but I'd rather get moving now than fight a battle. But after Stu said that night had already fallen and there was a clear sky and a full moon was in the sky, and as he looked behind him into the distance there was a tree, and it was the only tree he could see, and then mist come around the hill, and he saw a dark tall figure with what looked like an axe coming towards the hill, and he had hundreds or thousands of shaped figures about 30 meters behind him coming towards the hill. Then he got a glimpse and it was death. Stuart then said to the White Knights, we need about 200 White Knights brave enough to stay here and fight to the death to let Montgisha get a good enough head start to get to Holy Island. A few volunteers, and then Ye decided to volunteer, and Stuart said, Lee, what are you doing? You want to survive, you can't just sacrifice yourself. And EA said, I'll do whatever I choose, I'd rather stay here and feel I actually did something to defend her. Stuart then said, fair enough, you stay here, but you better hold out as best as possible, and I promise to defend her as best I can in your stead. EA then looked at Stuart and shook his hand and pulled out his red dragon sword and said, Stuart, this sword is the best sword the White Knights have. Protect Montgomery with it, and may I carry your sword. Stuart then shook Lee's hand, drew his sword and gave it to him. He then turned his back to Lee holding the dragon sword and wouldn't look back, and Montgomery ran to Lee and kissed him and said, I'm thankful for what you are doing, but why I don't want to lose you now. And EA replied by saying, to love someone you would have to make sacrifices to live or die for them, and I'm going to stay here and die for you. It's the only chance of peace. Montgomery looked at Lee and a tear dropped down her face. She then put her arms around him, then ran off with Stuart Lee with the other White Knights. EA noticed that STE was with him and he said, let's show these evil scum that there's nothing more powerful the human spirit, and they got in a circle at Stonehenge and the demon army closed in, and Death come close to the White Knights and said to Lee, if you're the last knight alive I will spare you and you will fight in my arena I am creating for all humans to fight until there's no humans left to fight, and he then walked away. One of the White Knights went to stab him in the back, but Death quickly turned round and grabbed him by the throat, sliced his legs off and threw him into the demon army for them to have their way with him, and continues walking away. Death then called the charge and over 14,000 demons charged at 199 White Knights, and they made a shield wall and the demons collided. They used the Stonehenge rocks as ways of defense, and only so many demons could come in at a time if the White Knights were in there, so they headed for inside of Stonehenge, and they were still coming in left right and the White Knights were killing few demons. EA saw STE grabbing two demons by the head and breaking both their necks with one hand and then grabbing his sword and putting his sword through the demon coming towards him. EA then saw a few other White Knights on the wall being cut down by the demons and two come towards Lee. One went to cut his throat. EA ducked, cut open his belly, then cut the demon's head off, but all around Lee the White Knights were being cut down. Eventually there was only Lee and a few others White Knights left. They killed about 350 demons. Eventually Lee and STE were back to back. They were the last White Knights alive. They would turn and turn, cutting demons coming towards them. Somehow Lee and STE became separated and time stood still as EA saw STE thrown up onto the wall by several demons. One had a black and orange striped face and he grabbed STE and bit his neck and wouldn't stop biting, and STE was on the floor and they kept stabbing and stabbing him till there was nothing left to stab. EA then screamed with anger. They then all looked at him and he was cornered. Then EA ran to them. He immediately stuck his sword into one of them and turned and sliced another. Black blood was splatting everywhere and mixing with the red human blood. EA dropped his sword, so he found a spear and threw it at the biggest demon he could find. It went through him and he fell to the floor screaming in pain, and then another demon came towards Lee armed with an axe. He swung for him. EA ducked, pulled him to the ground, stole his axe and hacked away at him. He lay there dead, and EA now had an axe and he wanted his sword back. EA saw it at the other side and he tried hacking his way through, but EA was too tired. He eventually fell to the floor right next to Stuart's sword, but the demons started kicking and punching him. EA was bleeding from the mouth and the pain was tremendous, but all of a sudden they stopped and the demons all stood in a line and Death come towards Lee and he was about to swipe his axe, but then EA was pushed to the ground by someone. He couldn't make out who it was, but EA rose to his feet and saw this woman fight Grim Reaper one-on-one, and she had no fear in her. All she had was anger and hate for who she was fighting, but she couldn't beat Death. She then quickly turned to Lee and said, Lee, run, run while you can. Then EA realized it was Elise. She had come back to seek forgiveness by sacrificing herself to save Lee, so he got up and ran for the woods, and EA headed northeast as Jonathan told him to do, even though EA was alone, and he looked to see if Elise was ok, and EA saw Grim Reaper grab her sword, snap it into, grab her by the throat, throw her to the ground, stick his axe in her so much that when he rose it she rose with it, and he turned round as if he was twirling and she was spinning attached to the blade, and she collided with the wall and she lay there dead, and EA knew he had to run quickly and head for Holy Island Castle through the woods of the Midlands. Chapter 14, Saving the People of Scarborth. Nathan and Stephen were leading the White Knights towards the sea edge to avoid going through York. They had come to a city called Scarborth and noticed a keep on the top of a very large hill, and Nathan turned to Stephen and said, that would be a good place to rest. It is at a high height and we could hold for sure if we are caught up by any of the demons. Stephen nodded, and the White Knights walked through the city and noticed the city hadn't been attacked by the demons yet and people were looking at The White Knights and some were giving them food and water. Some tried to heal their wounds while they were walking, but they eventually climbed to the top of the hill, and the sea was at two sides of the castle, and it would be very hard for the demon army to take the keep of Scarborth Castle, but it was still possible. As Nathan and Stephen stood in the hallway, Stephen said, "Why are we waiting here? The demon army will be coming here soon. God knows what happened to Stuart, Mongisha and Lee and those White Knights. We barely managed to escape ourselves." Nathan turned to him, Stephen, with anger in his face, saying, "We have to rest, Stephen, otherwise we won't get to Holy Island. We will die of tiredness, and there are people here who can become White Knights. We shall settle here for 2 days and then we will set off, and we shall see if Stuart turns up with Lee and Mongisha, and if he doesn't we shall presume they died or they are at Holy Island Castle, but we won't get to Holy Island unless we rest first." Stephen then had a look on his face. He turned and walked away and left Nathan alone in the room, and an old man come in the room and said to Nathan, "Have you ever heard about the 4 dragons?" Nathan shook his head and sat down in silence. The old man that began to say, "There are 4 dragons, and it's predicted once the demons rise, the dragons also rise, and the main dragon, who will be black, can only be killed by a sword described as a red dragon sword, and only the samurai have those, and there will be a white dragon who is good in him, but the dragons will be controlled by a demon wizard master, and this town is a major nesting place for birds, and the dragons may come here with the master, saying it hasn't been attacked yet, so I hope you are ready for war, young knight." The old man walked off into the darkness, and Nathan sat by the fire deep in thought, thinking about Mongisha and whether Lee and Stuart are still alive. All of a sudden Stephen runs in and says, "Nathan, come quick to the castle wall. There are some large objects coming towards here from the sea, and there are also a couple of boats." Nathan jumped to his feet and ran outside to the top of the castle walls and looked out to the sea and saw what looked like really large birds, and there was a few boats underneath, and Nathan screamed, "Totty, White Knights, everyone! Take cover!" The whole of the White Knights ran for cover in the castle as these large creatures flew over the castle, making a loud swooping noise, and one of the dragons, bright yellow around the edges of its wings and a dark shade of red on its body, and it tilts its head back and screeched at the top of its voice and let out a roar, and a dark red flame came out of its mouth like a flare to let the boats see where the city was. The White Knights were hiding, and Stephen and Nathan sneaked into the city to try and get some of the people to safety because the red lava dragon was still on top of the castle. But all of a sudden a dragon which had an ice effect color to its skin had flown over Stephen's and Nathan's head, and as it had flown over they felt cold and chilled, and it breathed a very cold wind which would freeze a man in seconds for the dragon to eat, and it began to terrorize the city. And Nathan and Stephen told the people of the town to head for the castle and seek shelter there, but the few ships had landed and demons began to line up on the beach, and a medium-height overweight figure walked off the boat wearing a cloak, walked onto the beach. His hood was down and he had no hair, and he had a pink face with 3 black lines going across his face, and he was holding 4 dragon tooths. It was obvious this man was in control of the dragons, and as he stood there the few demons got on their knees and said, "Hail Muingo, brother of Zordad." They all then rose to their feet, and Muingo ordered them to run into the city and take as many prisoners as possible and kill any White Knights and take control of the keep on the hill. Chapter 15 Battle of the Dragons. As the demons began to head north across the south bay of the beach, Nathan and Stephen were running back to the castle, and the red dragon began to attack them, and the White Knights began to use the bows to give Nathan and Stephen some cover, but it wasn't enough. As Stephen and Nathan became cornered, they had to draw their swords against the huge creature, and the creature was about to send out its flames, but another large object, which was a dragon but all white, it looked like an angel, and it thought with the lava dragon in the sky, and Nathan and Stephen made it back to the keep and watched the 2 creatures fight in the sky. As clouds came around the 2 large creatures and lightning began to flash, the red dragon went to swoop at the white dragon, but the white dragon swooped up and became on top of the red dragon and pushed the red lava dragon towards the ground with heavenly anger. As the dragons fell, the lava dragon began to breathe its fire as it fell, but it couldn't hit the white dragon, and as the white dragon stopped pushing the red dragon down, lightning flashed and struck the red dragon, and it fell to the ground silent, and as the red dragon lay there was smoke coming from it, the rain falling upon it. The white dragon roared as if it was taunting, and there was a scream of happiness and joy from the keep as the White Knights saw one of the evil dragons fall. The White Knights looked southwest towards the town and saw the ice dragon heading towards the white dragon with rage. The white dragon saw this ice dragon heading its way, and it roared and went full speed towards the ice dragon, and as they collided they fell to the ground and the ice dragon landed on the hill, and Stephen ran down and drew his sword and began to slice away at the throat of the ice dragon and managed to break through. The dragon then began to die slowly, its breath then ran faint till there was no breathing left in it, and the White Knights yelled out with a cry, "We have a dragon slayer who is a White Knight." Stephen then bowed and headed back towards the keep. One of the young White Knights ran towards Stephen, and before he got close a flame that looked like it was carried by the eastern wind came over him, and the young defender was still walking towards Stephen but on fire. His face was all melted and his hand was out to Stephen. He then fell to his knees and lay on the ground on fire. Stephen then looked to his right and saw a dragon bigger than the others, and it was all black, and Stephen ran as fast as he could. The white dragon collided with the black dragon, but it was outstrengthed as the white dragon headed for the sky to use the thunderstorm as a weapon. The black dragon was below and the white dragon was hiding in the clouds, and it pounced and began to try to push the black dragon to the ground, and it hit the ground and both dragons lay there. The White Knights then believed the black dragon was dead, and as Nathan stood there the old man came up behind him and said, "That black dragon is not dead, it will wake and kill the white dragon." Nathan's face began to look sad because he knew they could not kill the black dragon, and as the white dragon rose to its feet the black dragon did also. It blew acid in the eyes of the white dragon. As the black dragon's eyes glowed red it blew fire and burned the white dragon till death. As the white dragon fell down the hill and into the sea, the White Knights were in the keep and were unable to escape, but the black began to tear apart the castle and would get to the White Knights eventually. Meanwhile at the south end out the beach the demons were slaying and capturing humans, and Muingo sat on a chair by his ships with a smile on his face as he heard the terrifying roars of the black dragon in the distance. And on the streets the demons began to put the slaves in line to be branded, but they were ambushed by the White Knights, and Stuart had come in time with Montgisha and David, Scott, John and Jonathan. There was street fighting and the demons were surprised that they weren't fighting back at first, but it was too late and they were being killed and cut down very quickly by the tired White Knights. Knew that they had to get to that keep, and as Stuart ran towards Muingo 4 demons surrounded him. One went to cut his hand off, he jumped back, cut his throat and then punched the one on his left and swept his feet so he fell to the floor and finished him with a fast kill. And then the other 2 tried to run but were burned alive by the black dragon, and Muingo laughed and said, "You shall never defeat my dragon, so I hope you don't mind being cooked for my dinner." David performed a water spell to wet Stuart so he would have some protection from the flames, but as the dragon ran forward and pushed Stuart back, but as he fell back the red dragon's sword which Lee had given him at Stonehenge pierced the skin, and the dragon jumped up screeching in pain, and Stuart jumped to his feet and David shouted, "Cut it down, slice it till you can't slice it no more." Stuart ran and began cutting at its belly. Its scaled armor was no strong enough to stop the sharpness of the red dragon samurai sword, and the dragon fell to the floor and died. And Muingo sat there with amazement and rose to his feet and pushed Stuart with some unnatural power, but as he done that David stood in his way and used the same sort of power to push Muingo on the boat. And Muingo said to David, "Come young knight, let us fight in the air and let the god decide yours and my fate." They both floated into the sky and a thunder and lightning was striking everywhere. These 2 black magicians were fighting in the sky, and Muingo said to David, "One thing you must learn about black magic, you have to be evil to use it," and sent a flame from his hand towards David, but David dodged and said, "One thing you must learn about electricity, trees are a conductor of electricity." He then turned his cloths into tree wood surrounded by leaves, and the lightning began to strike Muingo time after time and he began to fall to the ground. He landed in the sea with a thud onto the shallow waters of the sea, and David came down slowly and said, "But you don't have to be evil to learn about electricity." The small army of Muingo and his dragons were slain, but the town of Scarborough was destroyed. Nathan and Stuart met on the beach of the North Bay, and Nathan said, "Where is Lee? Why isn't he here to witness such a victory?" Stuart held his head down in sadness and said, "We fell into a great battle at Stonehenge and he stayed behind with 200 White Knights to make a last stand. He gave me his sword to protect Montgisha, but we must be strong. We should head for Holy Island tomorrow night because I don't know how long Lee held out with his men, but for some reason something is telling me that Lee is still alive." Nathan looked at Stuart and nodded and said, "We leave at dawn. Make sure Montgisha gets enough rest and food for the journey to Holy Island Castle." Chapter 16 On the Run. Ye was on his own now and he had many miles to travel and he was being hunted down by Death and his army because he's sure he believes Ye will know her whereabouts and the White Knights will believe him to be dead, so Ye was heading northeast. He came across a road, there was no wildlife or anything, and Ye looked straight ahead and saw this giant hill which might as well have been a mountain, so he headed towards it and it was close to dawn, so Ye had to get to the cover of the trees before it was light, so he went there with haste. Ye had been running up and down hills for 2 days without food and then he came across a small camp in the middle of the forest. It was now night time and the rain was falling and this camp was made by wood off the trees and there were demons in the camp, so Ye ran into one of the camps and there was a few demons asleep, so Ye took out Stuart's sword and killed them and sneaked into the next tent and done the same, and then the guard heard something and came into the tent and Ye wrapped something around his mouth so he couldn't scream. Ye asked him where the food was and to point, and he pointed to the tent in the middle. Ye then said, "Show me by your hand how many more guards are there." He pulled up 2 fingers. Ye then said, "Where?" He then pointed to the part of the camp Ye couldn't see and then to the other one who looked like he was asleep, so Ye then said, "Well, thank you, now go back to that shite hole of a world you come from," and sliced his throat and his black blood squirted all over the camp and his hands held out to me as in he wanted mercy, so Ye then sliced his hands and said, "I don't give evil mercy because it wouldn't give me it," and then Ye came up to the other 3 tents and barricaded the doors and set fire to them and crept over to the guard standing next to the fire and picked up a log of wood which was small but on fire and jumped up in front of him and stuck it in his face. He screamed and fell to the floor holding his face. Ye then drew his sword, stuck it in his gut, and then saw the other guard running at him with a sword. He went to hit Lee in the head. Ye ducked, threw him over his back, sliced off his hand and then gave him back his sword and said, "Come on, you still have another hand, don't you?" He picked up his sword and said, "Who are you? You don't fight like a White Knight." Ye smirked and said, "Shut up and fight." He smiled, he had green rotten teeth, and he ran towards Lee again. Ye rammed his shoulder into him and then sliced his leg off and lifted his sword, cut his arm off which was missing his hand before he fell to the ground. He was lying on the floor screaming in pain while all the other tents were on fire with demons being burned alive. Ye then looked at him and picked up his sword and put it on the fire for it to heat up. Ye then closed his wounds and said, "I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to leave you here, and if you survive and Death sees you, tell him that I don't fear him and neither does none of the White Knights." Ye then put the hot part of the sword on his hand to let it burn him, and Ye went into the last tent which was standing and there was bread and beef, so Ye ate some food and drank some water and fell asleep, and in his dream Ye was in the sky and it felt as if Ye was in heaven, and he saw that evil was coming his way and Nathan, Stephen and Stu were next to him saying, "We must stand and defend, otherwise all is lost." And then Lee's eyes all of a sudden flew hundreds of miles forward and Ye saw something more evil than Death, and Death was there with 4 other people who looked like his brothers and they were on horses, and they noticed that Ye was looking at them and they all said at once, "This is what is to come if Earth falls." Ye woke up with a scream and his sword in one hand. The demon Ye left alive was asleep and the sword had cooled down on his hand, so he took it out of his hand and put it on the fire before it died out and it became hot again, so Ye put the fire out and then put the hot part of the sword on his hand, and then he woke up with a scream and Ye said, "Wake up, you think it would be impolite if you were still sleeping when your guests were about to leave?" And he looked at Lee and said, "Don't worry, White Knight, I will see you again when Earth is taken and the invasion of heaven begins. I will be back and you will be the first White Knight I hope to kill," and he began to laugh. Later that day Ye went far to east. Ye came to a beach and saw a deserted army barracks, and Ye saw a soldier's body there. He may have been alive, so Ye went over to check, and as Lee turned him over Ye discovered he was still breathing, so he gained consciousness and said, "Who are you? Hasn't the world ended yet?" And Ye said him, "Lee, I fight for the White Knights. I can see you're in the army. How long have you been here?" "A couple days," and he gave me some food and healed my wounds. He then said, "I have a horse and cart we can use to get to Holy Island Castle because I don't plan on hanging around here if there's a massive army of demons coming." So they got in the cart and headed north for Holy Island Castle, and as Ye spoke to him he said, "By the way, my name is also Lee. I was fighting in Africa when the demon army come and our bullets didn't kill them and we kept getting pushed back, and me and a couple of soldiers stole a ship to head back to England, and the ship was attacked by these large creatures. One of them was black and it made the ship sink with them in it. I just managed to escape and now here I am, and you're saying the only was to kill them as by a sort of spear?" And Da said, "Yes, there is no other way," and Da told him we had about 3,000 White Knights left to fight at Holy Island Castle. They eventually arrived at Holy Island Castle and the White Knights there let Lee and the other Lee, and Ye was cloaked and disguised just in case they thought he was a demon disguised as Lee. They then took Lee and Clavery to see Nathan and Stuart, and when they got to his room he noticed Stuart and he put Lee's red sword on the table, and Stephen and Mongisha were in the room, and he couldn't seem to take his eyes off Mongisha, and she looked at him and saw Lee looking at her, and then Nathan said, "Soldier, where did you find this cloaked man?" And Lee replied by saying, "He came to me and saved my life and told me how he was fighting at Stonehenge against demons, and he made a last stand with 199 other White Knights, and the betrayer Elise saved him and sacrificed herself for him to run away when he was the last White Knight there, and this man claims to be called Lee." And then all the people in the room looked at Lee, and he took off his cloak disguise and they saw it was Lee. He was badly bruised and cut, and they all rose to their feet and bowed, and Nathan said, "How could you survive against odds such as that with wounds as bad as the ones you have? I'm amazed, especially since death was there, but I'm happy you're still alive. Come in 1 hour and join us for our last dinner before we prepare for our very last stand against evil. Know where to run or hide." Stuart walked near Lee and bowed and said, "Good to have you alive. At least tomorrow I will be fighting alongside at least one good warrior, but somehow I knew Stonehenge was not your place to die. I had a dream last night where I saw you and you were fighting some strong man who looked like a king, and you pretended to be weaker than you actually were, and eventually you killed him with your strength, but you were killed also by many people. I woke up in a cold sweat, but it brought a thought that you may be still alive, and I was going to take a band of 20 White Knights to look for you, but it seems you found us first." He then smiled and ran to catch up with Nathan and Stephen, but then he stopped and turned round and come towards Lee and drew the red dragon sword and said, "This belongs to you, my friend, and may I have my sword back?" So he drew Stuart's sword and gave him his sword back, and he get back his red dragon sword and smiled and shook his hand once more. He then turned and began to talk to Nathan and Stephen about the dragons, and he went to join them. Chapter 17 Grim Reaper plans end of the world. Death found out that the dragons were killed and all the demons were, and Lee was at Stonehenge, and he escaped and destroyed the camp, and he heard the information off the very badly wounded demon. "I want him hanging off this cliff by his toes when we find him. How dare he escape death?" Death then turned to one of the White Knights who was still alive on the floor at Stonehenge and said, "Where are your friends going?" The knight spat in Death's face. Grim Reaper then lay him on the rock in the middle of Stonehenge and got his witch chief Slivogue to cast a spell. So Slivogue cast a spell and the knight set on fire and died of terrible burns. Death then said, "It's time to call the master. Go to Earth and let him know we can now open the gate of heaven with force because we have covered Earth with darkness." He then went on to his knees and looked to the rock at the middle of the Stonehenge, and the demons began to chant, and then a dark shadow come around Stonehenge, darker than it already was, and then a shape of a shadow sitting on a rock appeared, and then it turned into an actual figure. It looked like a man with terrible burns on his face and a very muscular body, and his skin seemed blue with cold, and it was Satan. And he raised his hands and all the demons cheered, and dark clouds come all around Stonehenge and turned into a swirl of a tornado, and Satan and his evil army then went into the tornado, which was the gateway to heaven, and before he was totally gone he ordered the demons and Grim Reaper to march on Holy Island Castle and get the woman and destroy all the White Knights but one who is called Lee and holds the red samurai sword, and then he disappeared into the sky. So at that moment Grim Reaper got his remaining 5 generals and told them to make their way north, and when they reach Holy Island Castle to surround the castle so there is no escape. And then the generals then got into formation and marched north away from Stonehenge. The battle for the dimensions of Earth and Heaven was about to begin. The Dark Lord Grim Reaper then gathered his 5 generals and made a plan, which was to go to Holy Island Castle, and Slivogue will attack the castle head-on whilst Norfair attacks from the east. Cersei would surround the castle to ensure no one escaped, and Grim Reaper will attack head-on with Slivogue and the others. Generals Ravel and Fretgrog were to follow as a backup to ensure victory. The Dark Army then began their march north for Holy Island Castle. They are 3 days away. Chapter 18 The Last Party. At Holy Island Castle, Nathan threw a party to get the spirits of the White Knights up, and in the Great Hall of Holy Island Castle it had been rebuilt to give a better safety feeling and stronger defense, but food was served: roast pork or beef and many vegetables and plenty beer or wine to drink, and the party began. Nathan made a speech saying, "I know you all think the end of the world is near, but if this is our end I suggest we make evil wait a little longer to have their goal. Let us show them that no matter how much evil poisons the world, the good times of parties and love still can stand strong among humans, and we will fight them to the last man. As he said those words, he turned to look at Lee as if to say that he knows Lee will be the last man alive. He then gathered with the generals of the White Knights, Stephen, Stuart and Nathan, and said, I will make a short speech to you. Then got on top of a table and said, ladies and gentlemen, listen, let us forget about what's is coming our way and just have the best night of our lives. Come on, let us make a toast to the White Knights who will always love and cherish what the best that life can bring. They then got down off the table and music began to play. The whole room was so bright with red carpet all around and orange curtains all around. The women were dressed in a light blue dresses and some were dressed in green, and the men were dressed in red or white. He was dressed in white with a gold line going through. They decided to dress the old ways for the night and called it a toga party. As everyone was eating food, Ye felt Mongish's eyes on him and he looked at her, and she rose and went into another hall to the side and hinted for Lee to go around with her. So Ye rose to his feet and finished his drink and went to where she was, and as Ye got closer to the door she grabbed his hand and pulled him in and said, I thought I lost you forever, but you come back like Jesus rose from the dead. Ye didn't know what he could say, so he just looked at her. They then kissed, and Nathan come round and said, I hope I'm not disrupting, but you guys should come back to the party and spend your time with everyone. So they followed Nathan back into the main hall, and Stuart and Stephen began to talk to Mongisha, and Ye noticed John with a young woman who he had never saw before with really short hair, and Ye walked over to see her and John, and Ye got to their side and said, I'd like to thank you for saving me from those demons at Stonehenge. I'm truly grateful. John then said, that is fine. By the way, this young woman here is Kelly. She is also a White Knight and she was at Stonehenge. Ye then bowed at her and said, you are a pretty strong warrior. I am glad to have you fighting with us. She then bowed and replied, I'm honored to fight alongside you. Ye then left them and noticed that Clovery the soldier was all alone in the corner drinking, so Ye went over and said, do you have any sword skill, because you're going to need some tomorrow? Clovery said, Yea, I have an idea. I will do my best with the sword I am giving. Ye then bowed and said, enjoy the rest of your night, my friend. Ye then walked away and sat at the table in front of Stuart, looked at Lee and smiled and said, you did real good to get out of that outnumbered situation, and Elise is forgiving for what she done because she saved your life, which is now I realize very needed for the fight which is about to happen. Ye nodded his head with agreement. Ye then felt very tired with being on a long journey, so he left to go to bed, and Nathan come over and said, why do you leave so early? The party is just beginning. Ye said, I'm so tired, I need sleep. I'm sorry to upset you, I mean no disrespect, but if I stay here another moment I will faint with tiredness. Ye then bowed and Nathan bowed to with approval. Ye then found a room which was made for him, then fell asleep in it. As Ye slept he fell into another dream, and Ye was outside Holy Island Castle and he had his sword with him but no armor, and then it was very misty and a tall dark figure come towards him and said, now there is no escape for Lee, you must fight me. Ye then drew his sword and pointed it towards him and said, I know now that you need the women for other purposes other than world domination, but I just need to find out why. Grim Reaper then replied by saying, you are wrong, now say nothing and fight. Ye then swung his sword towards his face, then Ye leaned sideways to dodge his, then he cut his long black gown, and all Ye could see was an evil dark red skeleton with souls trying to break out of its skin that it had left, and Death said, soon you will be with them inside me with no escape. At that moment he then dove forward with his axe and went to slice Lee's chest open, but then Ye woke up with a scream. Stuart come running and saying, what is it? Ye then replied saying, nothing, just a nightmare, my brother. It was still dark outside, but Stuart said it was close to noon, so it couldn't possibly be dark. Ye then went to speak with the other White Knights about the plan for our last stand, and Nathan and Stuart were whispering, and they come to Lee and said, Lee, no matter what happens you must protect Mongisha. David told me today that he had a foresighting that you will know what to do with her to save everything and everyone. Ye was astonished to hear this. Nathan then said, right about our defense, they will properly surround us and come in from east and west and head on, because those are the easiest ways in, so we will brace the gate and have a shield wall standing by behind the gate, so we have like a double gate with a spear wall behind the shield wall to do some damage to those demons. If they break that they will push us into the courtyard, there will be empty because we are going to encircle it with oil so that when the demons arrive we can toast them alive, and then once that Clears up, they will probably have more demons to fight. We charge straight at them to defend the stairway to the second level of the castle and hold them in the courtyard for as long as possible. We will then create a shield wall at the top of the stairway, forcing the demons into a bottleneck, and if they broke through that, we will have to fall back to the hallway at the other side of the castle and for yet another shield wall covered with a spear wall. Then if they break that, we go onto the roof, which the doorway there will lead them into a bottleneck, and the stairway will be covered with wood and hay and they will be covered with oils. Once the White Knights all are in the roof, we set fire to the hay, burning whoever is on the middle floor, because everywhere will be booby-trapped with gunpowder explosives. We then await the rest on the roof, where we will make our last stand and hopefully somehow come out alive. Any questions? Good, now get to work on the traps. Chapter 19, Battle of Holy Island. The sky had become clear and the stars were out with yet another full moon, but around the outside of the castle it was misty, and Nathan come towards Lee and said, "Lee, listen, if you're the last defender alive and you're about to be murdered and the women is no longer in your hands, light this fuse, it will blow the castle and everything in it will be gone, so no matter what happens Death will suffer heavily losses." So Ye took the torch and nodded. We then sorted the defenses out and then Ye stood at the corner of the roof with Mongisha and she said, "Lee, if we don't make it through and you're the last man alive, and I want you to take this, it's poison, it will kill you slowly but you won't feel anything, you will just feel normal, because I know Death wants to keep you alive so he can take you to Satan, so he can deal with you because you cheated Death, so promise me you will take it." So Ye nodded and took the poison off her and put it in his pocket, but as Ye looked over the castle wall, he saw this crooked shadow walking towards the castle gate. It looked like an old man, and they let him in and he come to the top of the castle, and it was Shioya the samurai who brought Lee up, and he said, "I have come to tell you something important, that women over there can also save Earth, but she has to be in the demon world or hell, and Death in hell and Satan in heaven, and if she dies in the demon world the gateways will be locked for 2,000 years and evil will be almost destroyed." Ye knew he was right, and then he said, "Now I have crafted a new sword for myself and I am going to give all my power and energy to fight all the evil alongside you, my son." Ye just smiled and said, "If that's what will make you happy, I'm happy for you." And then Ye went back over to Mongisha ready to protect her. Stuart was talking to Nathan and he said, "How many men do we have?" Nathan said, "We have 3,009 men. It isn't looking good, but it's better than nothing to fight with." At that moment we heard drums in the misty dark and shadows appear over the walls in the forests, and all around the castle there was dark figures who turned out to be demons, and the sky became clouded and it turned red and rain began to fall. The demons then began to taunt at the White Knights to scare them, but they weren't so easily afraid. They began to move to the castle slowly, and the drawbridge was fitted with barrels of gunpowder, and when the demons were on trying to batter down the gate, Clavery blew the drawbridge and killed the demons, but it also blew a hole in the gate, which was bad, so they had to get the shield men to quickly brace the gate because the drawbridge wasn't fully destroyed and you could still get across, and Slive called the charge on the castle and Nathan screamed, "Shield wall!" commenced. The shield wall was made and the demons were hitting the shield wall trying to break the shields, but the shield men had swords and slicing the demons' throats and cutting their limbs off. Stuart then shouted, "Spears!" and then the spear men then launched their spears over the shield wall and into the demons. One of the spear hit Fret Grog and killed him, so his troops become under the control of Death. The demons continued their push and eventually the shields were destroyed and the White Knights were fighting with just swords to protect them, and some White Knights were being thrown to the ground and being stabbed to death, and others were on the wall and with demons on top of them biting their necks and slicing their throats, and the demons killed the White Knights at the gates and come into the courtyard and discovered it was empty, and they were ordered to get into a circle in the middle of the courtyard in case of ambush until the rest of the army got inside, and when there was quite a few, John lit the fuse and set the whole courtyard set on fire and burned over 800 demons alive, and on the second level the shield wall was standing by this time more men and twice the spears and was captained by John. John then said, "Reform the line, reform the line, spears behind, shields, swords behind me, ready to charge with me." Slive and Ravel were with the next set of demons who pushed through the bottleneck, and Ravel pushed to charge on the shield wall, and most were just cut down by the shield or destroyed by the spears, and then the shields were dropped, swords were drawn, and John called the charge on the demons, and two sides clashed, and Ravel wanted to kill John because Ravel was in America as well, and John fought him one-on-one but ran on the boat to England, so Ravel went straight after John while John was dodging swings of swords by demons and slicing heads off and cutting throats. Ravel then reached John and said, "You, there's no escape now." John turned round and smirked and said, "I won't run this time, Ravel, come on one-on-one, me and you." Ravel then gave a smile showing his green teeth and black gums and then ran towards him and went to slice at John's side, but John ducked and threw Ravel over his shoulder and put his sword inside Ravel's stomach and instantly killed him. But as that happened, Slivog then challenged John, and Slivog was a more powerful demon and taller, and Slivog had two swords and John blocked the first strike off Slivog, but the second sword cut his arm, and then John went to cut at Slivog's legs, but Slivog kneed him in the head and sliced his face, and John was badly cut, and Slivog started kicking John in the stomach and in the head till John could barely stand, but John lay on the floor, then got up and gave an evil look at Slivog, and Slivog just smirked and said, "Come on then, what you going do?" And John charged, dived on the floor and sliced Slivog's hand off, and John got up and fought, and even more twisting and dodging strikes from Slivog, and then John fell over a stone and twisted his ankle, and Slivog killed a nearby defender and stole his spear and threw it in John's chest and said, "That will be enough from you." But John still rose to his feet and pulled the spear out and looked at it and smirked and limped towards Slivog and went for a headshot, and Slivog stuck his sword inside of John and twisted, and John died right there and fell to the floor, and the White Knights around him were heartbroken but made them fight harder, but they were being cut down one by Slivog and his demon army at his side. Death then come through the doorway of the stairway and ordered Slivog to push on and he would take care of the remaining White Knights. Death then said to the remaining White Knights, "Come on, there is 7 of you onto me, let's see if you can beat me." So the White Knights charged. Death ducked, threw one over his shoulder, he cut another's throat instantly, he then grabbed another one by the throat, stole his sword, stuck it through his friend and then killed him with his axe, and Jonathan tried to fight on but got wounded and tried to run, but Death just threw his axe at him and killed him instantly. Scott then challenged him, he swung his axe, Scott blocked, Scott swung his sword and it managed to tear Death's robe a little, this made Death mad, he went to swing again, Death blocked and it broke Scott's swords, he then pushed Scott to the floor, he then smirked S&D, stuck his axe into Scott and Scott said, "See you in hell." Death laughed, then ordered his demons to follow Slivog to the roof and kill the remainder of the White Knights. So the demons proceeded to the stairs at the 3rd level that had filled the stairway, and Stuart lit the fuse and set alight the whole 2nd floor and the stairway, and burned over 2,000 demons, but Slivog survived because his shield protected him that he stole of a defender, and he waited for the next wave of demons to come, and they arrived and they forced themselves onto the rooftop, and the shield wall was standing by, and Slivog ordered the charge and they charged at the shield wall. Some demons were cut down and killed by the spear wall that was threw at them, and then Stuart pulled back to where Nathan was, and Nathan screamed, "Charge my brothers," and the remaining White Knights charged, and Kelly knew that Slivog killed John and she wanted to avenge him, so she went for him, and Slivog saw what she wanted, so he stood in front of her and he drew his sword, and Kelly already had hers drawn, and they charged at each other, and Kelly got the first swing in, but Slivog blocked it and kicked her in the chest and then cut her arm off, and she still had one arm left, but she was still continuing to fight, and Slivog and Kelly charged at each other and at the same time put their blades into each other, and they both lay down near each other, and Slivog died first, and Kelly said, "Justice has been done, fight on White Knights and taste freedom." In the end then she died, and as Slivog's attack continued, Norfair arrived and entered the castle and come through with more men. Stephen was surrounded by 5 demons and he stabbed one of them in the chest and sliced the other's throat, grabbed one of them and put him in front of himself, and the other demon stabbed the demon instead of Stephen by mistake. Then Stephen then broke his neck and continued to fight on, and then Stephen saw Norfair and knew they might stand a chance if Norfair is killed, because then there's only 2 generals left, so he went for Norfair, who was the 2nd strongest general in the demon army. Death was the strongest, so Stephen went one-on-one with Norfair. Their swords collided in the air and Stephen swung his sword left hand. Norfair collided again and blocked perfectly, and then he cut Stephen's leg, and then Stephen continued to fight and he cut Norfair's arm, but Stephen was slowly being cut up, and then Norfair got a lucky cut on Stephen's wrist and he was then bleeding very badly and wouldn't have been able to survive. Stephen was bleeding to death and Norfair was just laughing at Stephen's attempt to kill Norfair, but Stephen then turned his back to Norfair, then quickly turned back around so he was facing Norfair, and he threw his dagger at Norfair and it hit him in the throat, and then he stuck his sword in Norfair's gut, and then Norfair went on one knee and stuck his sword inside Stephen, and Stephen fell over the castle wall and fell in the water and drowned, and then Stuart went to Norfair and sliced his head off, and then there was only Essence left, but he was surrounding the area, but Death orders him to move in, and Death would back up Essence, and they arrived on the roof, and the roof was very badly overrun with demons and White Knights were being slowly wiped out, and Stuart come over to Lee and said I shall defend Montgisha with you, and then Nathan was killing demons with ease. He was shown how his relationship was better with his sword than the demons was with theirs, and then Esense said I'd like to see you kill me, and Nathan charged and collided with Esense, clashing of swords, and Nathan nutted Esense and then he clashed swords again over strength. Him knocked his sword out of his hand, kicked him in the groin, punched him in the head and sliced his throat. Esense just lay there slowly dying, and then Nathan stuck his sword in his stomach to quick his death, and then death come out, and there were 700 White Knights left and 4,000 demons left fighting at Holy Island Castle, and the White Knights formed another shield wall to protect Montgisha and then backed them up with sword, but Grim Reaper just stood there and laughed and sent a double line of demons towards them, so the shield wall couldn't parry, so they had to eventually drop the shield wall and charging. The White Knights were killing demons with ease, but tiredness was coming fast and more White Knights were being killed, and then Grim Reaper sent 20 demons straight after Lee and Stuart to occupy us while he collected Montgisha, and so the demons were fighting Lee and Stu in clashing of swords and breakings of bones. They were killing the demons with ease, and then Grim Reaper knocked Lee out and did the same to Stuart, and he was clear to walk straight to Montgisha, and she fainted under a sleep spell which Death put on her. David trying to get into Death's way, but he just stuck his axe inside David and killed him instantly, and then he got close to Montgisha and Nathan stood in the way of Grim Reaper, and Grim Reaper tried to stick his axe into him, but Nathan blocked and his axe was thrown out of his hand, so Grim Reaper grabbed a sword off a defender and stuck his sword through his back, and then he used the sword against Nathan and the clashed with swords and held the stance, and Nathan said I won't let you win, Death, you can't possibly win, look at your army, it's been badly damaged, even if you win here and Satan gets defeated in heaven, God will come down and destroy you. Grim Reaper just laughed and said yeah, but the way things stand they're too much evil to be destroyed. You White Knights are beaten, there's only 20 of you left and you will be dead soon. You should never got in my way and going to cut your heart out and take it to God and force it down his throat. And they continued to fight, and Nathan was putting up a real good fight. He was blocking everything Reaper threw at him, and Reaper was doing the same when Nathan threw blows, and then he grabbed Nathan by the throat and said you fool, I know how the White Knights fight, I knew every move you were going to throw at me, now you will die. He threw Nathan into the wall and it snapped Nathan's spine and his ribcage pierced his lungs, so he was drowning in his own blood from the inside, and Death looked at him and said I will not put you out your misery, you may lie there and die in pain, you human pig. And Nathan just lay there and a tear come out of his eye and he screamed leave me, kill him, show him the White Knights are forever. And Stuart said Lee stay here and protect her, I will take him on now, and EA said no, it's me who must face him, so EA threw Stuart to the side and stood in front of Death and drew his dragon sword and said let's see if I have the same fate as Nathan, I have dreamed of this moment. Death smiled and said well, I will make your dream a nightmare, and he ran towards Lee, and Lee ran and rolled across the floor and sliced his back, and his cloak was sliced open, and EA heard Shuaya say use the samurai ways, it's the only way, and then Death threw a spear into Shuaya and he fell over the castle wall. Ye stood up and screamed in terrible pain. Ye lost his only family, and then Shua's soul came to me for one message. He said think back to the samurai ways and when you were a child. So Ye thought back to being a child and everything Shuaya taught him, and Ye thought it is the only way, so Ye used the way of the samurai, and Ye refused to be beaten, and he swung his sword round and round. Grim Reaper was so occupied he could only defend. Ye cut his cloak off and he looked exactly as he did in Lee's dream, and he fell to the floor. Ye had him beaten, but he called his men to help him, and Ye sliced the demon's throat and stabbed the other in the chest and dropped back, and they all charged at Lee and Stuart. They were the last two White Knights, and Clavery was with Montgisha, and he picked up a sword and he was prepared to fight, and then Ye had a thought which come from heaven, and Ye screamed stop, wait a minute Death, can we come to some sort of negotiation? I have a good proposal. Death said this had better be good, otherwise I will cut you in half right now. Lee then said I have a torch right here Death, and if I light the fuse it will blow this castle and kill everything on it including Montgisha, and you will lose. Also you need her to destroy heaven, but hell is left unguarded, so why don't you take her back to your world, invade hell, claim hell as your own, therefore you claim everything. Death then said that is a good idea, I would own everything. He then said what do you want in return? Ye then said for Earth to be free and allow humanity to live as free people in 10 minutes alone with Montgisha, so I can say my goodbyes. Grim Reaper said so. Be it, we will leave you in peace and you may have 10 minutes. So EA picked up Mongsha, Stuart and Clavery followed, and they went into Lee's bedroom on the bottom floor and lay her there, and Stuart said, "What are you doing?" And EA said, "If we put this poison in her she will die slowly, and if she dies in their dimension it closes everything and destroys all evil. It's a gamble we have to take." And Mongsha woke up and heard everything EA said, and she said, "Lee, as much as I wish you were wrong, you were right, and I have to die in venom or hell to close the gateways forever, so give me the poison." Mongsha then took the poison and kissed me and said, "I'll go back to sleep now, but I love you and I'll always be with you." And then a tear come out Lee's eye and he saw a tear roll along her face as they both tried so hard not to cry. And EA took her to Grim Reaper and he said, "Out of every human ever you must be the wisest," and then he disappeared into his home portal and took all evil with him. And then the sunrise. "She's ours, and now I will invade hell with my remaining demons and take over." And then Death invaded hell, and as he saw the throne empty and he sat upon it, every began to shake because a new ruler had come, and in heaven Satan just turned to dust and bones and had become nothingness. And then as he become ruler of everything, Mongsha died and Grim Reaper rose to his feet and said, "No, this cannot be outsmarted by a human. Lee, I will get you for this." Death then turned into dust and become nothingness. The demons were torn between realms and become nothingness, and the captured White Knight souls were freed and sent to heaven. God stayed on the throne, and Lee and Stuart sat on Holy Island Castle, and Lee said, "It's amazing how we lost the battle but we survived." Stuart then said, "We are the last White Knights on Earth. Shall we train up new White Knights, or do you think it's safe to lead a normal life?" Lee then said, "I think it's safe, but we should begin to start training them just in case."